Something specifically that someone asked me was about how to get like fullness in your mix, and I would say the best way to approach that is, I mean, obviously, when you have like a blank slate, let's say, no sounds are coming, and then you put an instrument in there, you're taking up a certain amount of space, and you can see that on your spectrum analyzer. You can see what frequencies you're taking up. Let's say that you have a song right now that you feel like isn't full, or it's not really hitting you with the energy that you want it to when you listen to it. And I would say, okay, first you need to go back and check your gain stage, okay? Are your drums as loud as they need to be? And the relationship that your drums have with all the other instruments, are the gain levels for all your instruments where they should be? And play around with that. Because it could be that, I mean, something as simple as like your snare isn't turned up enough, or maybe like one of your auxiliary instruments, like the guitar or the piano, isn't turned up enough, and then suddenly your whole mix kind of, it's weak and crumbles in certain areas. So it could be that. It could also be that you're literally not taking up enough room in your, in the frequencies of your song, if that makes sense. So your song might be missing a lot of like upper frequencies, or maybe like lower frequencies, and now it's coming off like a lot weaker, even though all the instruments are there and the mix spatially is full, but it's not full in terms of its frequency. So I would say what you need to do there is, well, first you have to identify what frequencies are lacking, and that kind of comes with experience as well. But one of the things that could be really helpful is listening to like a reference song. So to go find a song that you like and that's professionally mixed, and then you're using that as like a reference or template for the song that you've made. So maybe when you compare it to that reference song, you're like, okay, they have a lot more lower frequencies than I do. So now I need to turn that up. Okay, so how do you turn that up? And this is where you can get pretty creative with, okay, how do I fill these frequencies a little bit more? The simplest way is you could slap an EQ on there and just kind of boost those frequencies. Sometimes I duplicate the track and I EQ out just exactly the frequencies that I want to add into the mix, and I kind of turn that up accordingly. You could use like effects, just think of different ways to get that frequency back into the mix. So one of the things I'll do pretty often is duplicate a track, like an instrument. So say I have a piano, but my piano is like featuring chords in a song, but it kind of comes off weak. I might duplicate that piano channel and then put some slightly different effects on it, and then EQ on it so it's not getting in the way of my original piano channel. And then I'll gain stage that second piano channel in, just so it's filling up more of the mix now without getting in the way. Yeah, I would also recommend starting with like the high energy part of your track, just because that's what I'm usually concerned with in my songs, is that the part where all of my elements kind of come in and converge, and then I'm trying to get a response from the audience. So that's where I start with my mix, and I make sure that, okay, this is kind of like the most important part of my song. I want to start here and gain stage everything, make sure everything's in its own space, spatially and frequency-wise. Then I can mix it just a little bit differently as the song goes on. Another way to expand harmonics would be to use sometimes I use distortion or saturation, and if you use Ableton, I mean, it doesn't really matter what you use, every DAW's gonna have some plugins for this, but yeah, basically I use the default plugins, saturators or distortions, and they work quite well to kind of give certain elements a punch at certain frequencies, and you can program that in on the plugin, and that helps expand that element and fill it in its space in the mix. I'll talk about the drums a little bit because I make a lot of hip hop influenced songs and like electronic dance songs. The drums, I found that the drums are really important, and when I first started music production, my drums were actually really weak, and I was surprised to learn how much your drums should fill up the mix. So sometimes when I solo my drum track, I'm trying to make sure that it sounds very full. Just the drums alone, I want to sound very full when you're listening to it. And it's not necessarily like that for all of my other tracks. But that does a lot to bring in energy, because especially if you're making the type of genre where the drums are driving the track. Another thing that you have to take into account with the mix is you have to keep in mind, you kind of have to know which element you're featuring in each part of the song, and which element is driving that song forward, and which one you want the audience to be listening to, and which also means that all the other instruments are just supporting that one. And so if you're making a build up and you're trying to bring in like a lot of tension, I know a lot of electronic songs, they use the drums as the driving force as you get close to the drop, and then they might put a siren in the background, so those drums actually get mixed in pretty loud as you're approaching that drop, and then the siren is just kind of supporting it. It's not as upfront in the mix, and then when the song finally drops, you might have the drums are still really prominent, and then like vocals come in. The vocals are very upfront and very clear. Some elements are going to be in the front of the mix, which means there's not going to be a ton of reverb on it. There's not going to be a ton of delay, so that it comes through clear. It feels like they're kind of right in front of you, singing like at your face. Same with the drums. If you want really high energy, punchy drums, that means that you're not going to drown them out in reverb and delay. They're going to be right in front of your face, as if someone was playing the drums in front of you. And then likewise, if you have elements that you want just as supporting elements or ambiance, you would have them further back in the mix. What does that mean? That you would a lot of reverb, you can put a lot of delay, you could actually even put a low pass filter or a high pass filter, and that gives it the perception of being further back in the mix. So when you're making your song, you have to think about, okay, what are the elements doing? Which elements do I want up front, which are more featured? Which elements do I want in the back, which are more supporting? And that's going to change throughout your song. So that's another important part of the mix to think about. Especially when I'm mixing something like I have some some synth chords and vocals on a certain part of the song, I'm going to EQ as little as I can out of the vocals, because that's the element that I'm featuring. I want it to come through the most, and then most of my EQing would be shaping my chords around that vocals. And you can apply that to anything. If I'm featuring my drums, I'm going to take as little as I can out of that, while making space for it in every other element. That was pretty much all I had planned to say in this video. Wasn't a lot. I really just wanted it as like an introduction. If you have any like specific questions or something that you wanted me to talk about more, I'm happy to do so. Just let me know in the comments, and I will touch on that on my next video.